Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Briefing for Wednesday, August 9th. This is Gina McGuire. Over the next couple of days, we will continue to see generally wet thunderstorms over the northern half of the Great Basin today and Thursday, with drier air moving in from west to east later in the weekend this weekend. Winds will still be gusty near thunderstorms. Even this morning, there are a few isolated thunderstorms over northern and eastern Nevada into Utah, and these thunderstorms are producing a gusty outflow wind of 53 miles per hour up at Maury Creek, which is northeast of the Dune Fire. So even some areas that do get wetting rains, there will be other areas that see drier conditions with gusty outflow winds. Over the last 24 hours, we've seen generally thunderstorms. Again, in some of the same areas, we'll see them today over the northern and eastern half of the area. Again, these thunderstorms were wet, with many areas over southern Idaho into Utah seeing precipitation amounts above 1/4 of an inch. However, further west over northern and western Nevada, some of these storms are on the drier side and only produced light amounts of precip. Great Basin fire activity was generally light yesterday, with a few new large fires, however, over parts of southern Idaho, near the Utah-Nevada border, and over northwest Nevada. Precipitation over the last 7 to 30 days over the last week has been concentrated over the southern half of the Great Basin. At least this has been largely where the wetting rains have been. And over the last 30 days, kind of that same pattern over the southern half of the area associated with the monsoon moisture, with still very dry conditions over the last 1 to 4 weeks or longer across Idaho. How this is reflected in our ERC conditions, you can see the image on the left showing still critical ERCs generally across Idaho into far northern Nevada, with much wetter conditions further south. The images on the right also show the graphs for the central Idaho mountains. You can see ERCs are at records, and also 1,000-hour moisture is setting new records for the time of year for the west central Idaho mountains. Looking at 10-hour fuel moisture, again, still very critical conditions generally over the western half of the Great Basin, where these drier conditions have persisted. The satellite loop from this morning still shows weak high pressure over the southern areas of the Great Basin, and you can see the moisture this morning with the clouds over parts of northern and eastern Nevada into Idaho and northern Utah, where again we are seeing some isolated lightning strikes. Now looking at our pattern and fire potential for today, we do not have any high risk across the Great Basin. However, still in these areas of yellow over northern Nevada into southern Idaho and northwest Utah, we still have dry grasses in areas that have not received precipitation. Therefore, the scattered thunderstorms we'll see today may still cause some increases in fire potential in areas that stay dry. Looking at the weather for today, again, very similar to what we saw yesterday, with lightning over the northern and western half of the Great Basin, mostly on the wetter side with higher humidity, but again, still in some of these areas, we will see drier storms, which will increase fire potential locally. Also, gusty outflow winds will be associated with all of these thunderstorms. As we move into Thursday, the pattern starts to dry out a little bit over southwest Nevada, with thunderstorms being pushed slightly further north and east. Again, no high risk for Thursday, as most of these storms will be on the wetter side. And you can see this weather pattern in the image on the left, with that drier air starting to move its way into central Nevada, but still thunderstorms continuing over northern and western Nevada up into Idaho and over into Utah. Again, gusty outflow winds will continue. We also may see an increase in southwest winds with drier conditions over parts of southern and eastern Nevada as that dry air starts to work its way north. On Friday, you can see that drier air pushing further north and east, pushing that moisture further north into Idaho and Utah. We do not have any high risk yet for the central Idaho mountains, but we may have to watch especially the west central Idaho mountains, where fuels are still very critical and setting new records for the time of year if that lightning starts to work its way north, and will likely be a mix of wet and dry. So that will be the most critical area likely on Friday, will be the mountains of Idaho. You can see the image on Friday, that moisture starting to work north, again with much drier conditions now pushing mostly across Nevada. Winds will generally be light to moderate. Again, we could see that southwest wind flow as that dry air moves in, somewhat breezy over the southern half of the Great Basin, along with continued gusty outflow winds. The overall forecast amount of precipitation shows again wetting rains in many of the areas we will see lightning. However, once again, some of these heavier wetting rains will be more localized, especially across Nevada into southern Idaho. As we move into this weekend, we'll continue to see that dry air move northeastward, with still lightning continuing over parts of Idaho, Wyoming, and into Utah. And again, we may have to watch the central mountains of Idaho for high risk for lightning even as we continue into Saturday. As we move Sunday into early next week, you can see that dry air now start to push eastward into parts of far western Utah. So we will see lightning activity decrease from west to east, especially as we go into early next week. We'll see that dry air really over the southern half of the Great Basin, with still continued lightning possible into early next week across Idaho. And we will continue to watch this lightning as, again, this is the area of the Great Basin where fuels are still most critical, at least in the larger fuels and live fuel moisture. However, dry grasses will continue to be problematic over the northern half of the basin. As we move into Tuesday, we may see dry air now push really across all areas with the exceptions of eastern Idaho into Wyoming and parts of northern and eastern Utah. And you can see the reflection in our fire potential where many areas are now going from yellow to brown. If we look at the 7-day total amount of precipitation, again mainly focused over the northern and eastern half of the Great Basin with wetting rains, with much drier conditions over the western areas where any wetting rains will be very localized. The 8 to 14-day outlook, which takes us into the third week of August, shows possibly some cooler weather moving into the northern and eastern side of the Great Basin, however also drier conditions now materializing over the southern two-thirds of the area. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.